with Australian nationals on the horizon, I decided on a whim to do the maths and run simulations of everyone in the top 10 for every event on the site sheet. And with that, I have gathered a predicted list of all the nationals podiums. Goes without saying, but this video was inspired by Cube Master, and if you haven't seen him, I recommend you checking him out, link in the description. And also a disclaimer, this is maths and simulations. There is no bias whatsoever, but there are a few things I need to cover. Firstly, it assumes no one gets NR in the finals, which I feel like makes sense. Just thought that it was something that should be brought up. Basically, it outputs them all as a score between 0 and 100, 0 being DNF, and 100 being first place PR average on the site sheet. So just keep that in mind. Starting off with multi-blind, we have a fairly standard list, I'd say. Third is Swami with 19 points. This makes sense. He doesn't have an amazing success rate, so I think 19 points is pretty reasonable. Second place was Tam with 21 points, which I honestly thought was a bit low, considering he has a famously very good success rate, but I suppose it's not too unreasonable. And first, finally getting the national champion title he deserves, is Michael with 29 points, which is obviously still really low for him. I think the simulation understands that he has bad comp nerves at championships, and he's known to choke at championships. But yeah, just 29 points is still good enough for the win in this case, so it doesn't really matter. Moving on to 5 blind. At third place, it puts me with a 1033, which is not something I necessarily agree with. I understand that it looked at my results and saw that I have massive improvements every comp, but breaking my own state record by over a minute just seems unreasonable in this case. Second place goes Charlie with 609. Also makes sense. I like how the formula understands that he's improved a lot between comps and didn't just put him at 7 minutes, which is where he was before. Obviously it didn't put him at his full potential because it was a one-time massive jump, so it also understands that it could have been a fluke, but yeah, I just thought that was interesting. And in first place is Michael with a 358. Not much else to say here. Michael is the GOAT of Australian Big Blind, so that's not unexpected. Moving on to 4 blind. In third place is Lennon with a 430 predicted, which does make sense. He's fairly consistent with a decent success rate, and I'm not surprised it didn't put me in the top 3 because it understands that I've fallen off and I only get solves over 5 minutes. So it put me all the way down at 5th with a 449 predicted, with whatever. Second place was Charlie with a 218. Also makes sense. He has a high success rate, and that is what he averages on his WCA profile, so not much else to say. And first, again, very stock standard, Michael with a 149. Not too much else to say there. Now moving on to some more interesting events where it's not carried. Square one, Benjamin Worry was in third with an 8.39 predicted average, which looks about right looking at his profile. He has a pretty standard profile, so yeah, that makes sense. Second place is Hayden with an 8.01 predicted average. Now this is actually someone I'd never heard of, mostly because he's hardly been to any comps. So obviously any statistics of him are going to be less accurate because it's a smaller sample size, but looking at his square one profile, I think second place is reasonable. And in first place, unfortunately, is David Epstein with 644 predicted average. This is incredibly biased for me, but I don't want him to win for obvious reasons, but that's what the math said, unfortunately. Moving on to Scube, third place put Tyler Williams with a 382 predicted average, which is a bit of a wild card because he is very inconsistent on his profile. But I guess it averages out to 382 in the end or something. I'm not super sure. And just barely beating him by 0.01. Second place expected is Zeke Ding with a 381 predicted. Again, this is someone I'd never heard of, but if you look at his profile, it makes sense. And the predicted national champion for Scube is back-to-back Eli Pineda with a 321. Again, makes sense if you look at his profile. Moving on to Pyraminx. Third place predicted was Emmett Holmes with a 291. This seems a bit slow for him, but He is quite inconsistent, and I guess it just went to the upper. I don't know how it deals with inconsistency, but yeah, that is what it put out for him. And again, Zeke Ding in second place with a 290 predicted average. Not too much to say there. And Sebastian Lee obviously comes out as national champion with a 2 flat predicted average, which I would have assumed would be sub 2 because the simulation knows to take into account comp nerves at major championships, and he's held his nerves very well, especially at Worlds, where he came second. But yeah, 2 flat, I suppose. For Megaminx, put James Holdsworth at third with 48.4 predicted average. I think this does make sense as he's shown to be able to get consistently fast results. Lots of 45 averages, but a couple of slow recent averages hold it up, I think. Second place is Felix, the 41.94 predicted average. Also makes sense. The simulation has correctly identified that he's starting to fall off as he goes into retirement. So it's considerably slower than his NR average, but I think it makes sense. And it thinks national champion will be Jamie with a 40 average, which, yeah, that makes sense. He's been improving crazy fast recently, but he hasn't had any major championships to back it up. So I think slightly slower because of comp nerves, so that makes sense. For Clock, third place was someone I'd never heard of, coming in with a 599 average. It predicted to be Daniel Wang. Never heard of this kid, but yeah, his profile, that makes sense that he comes third in Clock. Second place was a big shock to me. It was Zaid Chowdhury with a 563. I always assumed he would have won Clock, but looking back on his championship performances, it does make sense because you upped the NF average at Nats, Oceanics, and he choked at Worlds Finals. So the simulation obviously took that into account and put him second behind Conan, who is predicted to win with a 5 flat average, which makes sense. He is consistent. He proved himself to have good nerve control at Worlds, and yeah, that makes sense to me. Moving on to one-handed, again, someone I'd never heard of taking third place. This is actually really interesting to do because it brought a bunch of cubers I'd never heard of who were really good at a particular event into the spotlight. But third place is Nicholas Paul with a 12.5 average. I've never heard of this guy, so take that as you will. Second place, Riley Dexter with a 12.21 average. Makes sense. I've never known him for 3x3. I actually don't know too much about Riley, but I've always known him for 3x3 more than OH, but this definitely makes sense because if you're good at one, you're good at the other. And in first place is Felix with an 11.21 average, which is full second faster than second place, so it's pretty solid, and I think that does make sense, to me at least. Moving on to 3 blinds, this was a big surprise, because in third place is Michael Tripodi with a 23 flat. 3 blinds definitely is worst out of the 4 blind events, so I'm not too sure how I feel about this one, especially considering that he beats out people like Tam, who's 4th on the simulation. So it's definitely very interesting to look at. I think it's because Tam has a lot of safety solves on his profile. Like, he has a couple 40s and 50s in his recent solves. So maybe that's what the simulation took into account and dragged him down a lot, which is definitely a flaw when in blind events. But there's not much I can do about that. Second place is Jack Kai with a 21.57. This makes sense as that's where he consistently averages, and it's pretty much the only event he practices nowadays. So him podiuming would make sense to me. And in first place by almost 6 seconds is Charlie Ekins with a 15.64 predicted. Yeah, makes perfect sense. He's OCR holder by a lot, and I don't see anyone coming close to his league for a while. Now moving on to the N-by-Ns, this is going to be a lot of the same, so just get ready. Starting off with 7x7, he's definitely the most surprising of the N-by-Ns, but in third place is Ryan Driscoll with a 239 predicted mean, which makes sense to me. I don't know too much about him, but if you look at his WCA profile, his results seem to back up this prediction. But his second place is actually Felix with a 205 predicted mean. This was a big surprise to me because even though he's starting to fall off, I'd expect Felix to still take out all the M-by-Ns, well, except like 2x2, but yeah, that was a big surprise to me because in first place it actually put Hayden NG with a 202 predicted mean. And as I said, Hayden's results might not be as accurate because much smaller sample size. He hasn't been to very many comps. But the formula looks at his result and knows and sees that he improves really quickly. So that's actually an expected PR mean. out of Hayden, which is really, really odd, but that's what the formula says, I guess. In 6x6, in third place is Brian Ang with a predicted 148 mean. I don't know Brian really, but that makes sense if you look at his profile. So cool. Second place is Hayden NG with a 130 predicted mean. Like with 7x7, he does improve ridiculously fast, but I guess it's not to the same extent to where he can overshadow Felix, who's still in first with a 126 predicted mean. Pretty similar story for 4x5. Hayden NG's in third with a 58 predicted average. Brian is in second with a 55 predicted average, and Felix sweeps by over 10 seconds with a 45 predicted average. I think 5x5 is still Felix's main event, so that makes sense as to why he's able to still dominate so hard. 4x4 was another interesting list, as it's not one I could have predicted myself, but that's the magic of maths, I suppose. So in third place is Jody Brewster with 30.86 predicted average, which makes sense. He's good at all the MINs. Second place, though, was Liam Heidechek with a 30.16 average, which is something I would not have predicted because that's only half a second slower than his PR average, which I wouldn't expect in finals. But then if you look at his profile, he is insanely consistent because his PR average is 29.4, and he still has a lot of sub-30 averages even with that. So this actually makes sense in my eyes. And in first place is still Felix with a 25 average. Moving on to 2x2. In third place is Karen Stollery with a 2 flat predicted average, which would actually be really cool to see because he's become somewhat of an old legend in Australian cubing, if you want to put it that way. But yeah, if you could put him in 2x2, that would be really cool. Second place is Brian Ang with a 1.8 predicted average. This also makes sense. He's fast at 2x2 and relatively consistent, I'd say. But the predicted winner of 2x2 is obviously Phoenix with a 1.66 predicted average. I'm not too much to say. He holds OCR, and it's not even close. So. And now for the main event, 3x3. Third place predicted with a 7.24 average is Jody Brewster. This makes sense. He has a sub-6 average and holds OCR single, but he is quite inconsistent, so third place makes sense for him. Second place is predicted to be Riley Dexter with a 6.89 average, which also makes sense to me. He's very fast, and he was able to podium at Nats last year, so I don't see why he couldn't do it again. And in first place, it still predicts Felix Zemdegs as the national champion 2023 with a predicted average of 6.65. So yeah, that was just a quick rundown prediction of all the events to be held at nationals. I think most of them were pretty accurate, except for like a couple oddballs in like big blind events and Hayden. But that's just what will naturally happen with events like that and people like that, with their profile, etc. So I hope you enjoyed this short little video. I'm sorry if the quality wasn't great, but I just wanted to get these findings onto the internet somehow. So thank you for watching. And as this video goes live, I'm probably in Queensland right now at the Nationals. So if you want to keep up to date with that, check out my Instagram. It will be on screen and in the description. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.